Yeah, 100%. I'll start off by saying the general theme is like organizations tend to take on kind of the personality of what they sell. It's something that I've sort of learned over time. Maybe it's blindingly obvious to some, but sometimes you learn best by experience. So then, when I was in at the SAF, I had actually gotten my co-op terms at MNP. Well, first time I was at the SAF. So Nancy and Adam were my coworkers, along with some of your other profs. But from there, I started at MNP. So this was back in the under the old CPA program where you had to get your audit hours and do all that. So they owned you for the first however many months it was. But that was a great experience. So it was like a lot of skill sets built. Um, it was a lot of exposure to a lot of different types of organizations. So it's MNP at the time. I don't know what they're like now in terms of, obviously they've grown tremendously, but they were different from, say, the Big Four, where there was a huge variety of organizations that they served. So during that time there, I had exposure to, publicly listed companies, manufacturing, not-for-profits, nursing homes, everything. Nothing was really virtual those days. You're out there literally like sitting sometimes in darkly lit basements, sometimes in fancy boardrooms working on things. And then from there, like just I love the idea of being that generalist, and I think that's a theme that's kind of paid off a little bit, or at least held consistent over my career. And so building that sort of skill set, I think, helped me jive well with some of the partners there. So once I graduated, completed the UFE, got the CPA. Very shortly after that, I was very interested in kind of, stepping away from audit, doing something that I felt was maybe more interesting, maybe felt more value add in my mind. And from there, I ended up on a consulting engagement out in Botswana. And so that was a switch out of audit. I was excited. I was there for like 6 months or something like that. And it was like basically, if you imagine your Service Ontario, you log on, you're trying to renew your license, trying to get a business license, whatever it is, it's kind of that equivalent in Botswana. So that was a very cool project, completely out of audit. And then from there, that gave me kind of the credibility at MNP to switch over to consulting. And from there, it leveraged those CPA skills to go into enterprise risk services. So that's really your internal controls, go, no-go decisions, strategic analysis and things like that. So it's super interesting. A lot of focus on internal controls, but even from there, a chance to travel a lot and like see different organizations. And then, when it was time when I felt like I really wanted to kind of get out there and help build something for real, that was when I made the leap. And I felt like what fit maybe what I wanted the most was this medical tech startup. So I was at this organization called Synaptive Medical. We're still around today, of course. But they were working on really innovative, kind of made in Canada equipment to help out with brain surgery. And so honestly, it was like working at the coolest place ever, somewhere in Toronto. I didn't see a piece of paper for the entire time I was there. Let's just put it that way. Which now it doesn't sound like a big deal, but still, it was a very interesting experience. But I learned a lot at that organization, and it was really building their financial reporting team. So it was going for them as a senior financial analyst, like helping out. They used to close their books like once a year. They struggled with their audit. They didn't have internal controls. They were burning through cash very quickly. It was very interesting, and it was a very welcoming culture. And so from there, I got to like try to prod and make all those changes. And then I guess kind of the next move from there was just kind of growing into management. And so this opportunity came up at this law firm, McCarthy Tétrault, so one of the largest law firms in Canada. Very cool. They were doing a complete rebuild, and I think this is a theme. I mean, a lot of folks on the call obviously have been through their co-op terms, but if any of you have been kind of at even bigger organizations, a recurring theme you'll find is things are held together with duct tape, right? And they're barely holding on. McCarthy Tétrault, like many law firms, is like it's old, literally like 100 years old or more. But they were doing a complete rebuild of their finance function, and that happens all the time at so many different organizations. So that was a chance to again rebuild a financial reporting team. I had a great director whom I reported into, and learned a lot about kind of leadership from her, learned a lot of skills from her, and then I also had a chance to build up the financial planning and analysis function. And so in trying to bring this and tie this, I guess, back to performance management, it's hard to just start off right in performance management, at least from my perspective in the role that I'm doing, you really got to build that kind of generalist and like well-rounded kind of view. And so going from your financial reporting sort of um, very much focusing on past oriented results and like analyzing the present state to financial planning and analysis where I'm helping them budget and forecast, then you're getting a little bit closer to another kind of theme to highlight, like really knowing what a business sells and what they do. And that is obviously at the law firm, legal services. And so understanding that, looking at building the business acumen to understand drivers and building that relationship with folks who own the business, that was super interesting. And so I think that was like a big learning adjustment for me. It was a very different environment from, say, a startup environment. It was very much super professional. People dressed up way nicer than I was used to, et cetera, et cetera. Wasn't anything like Suits before anybody asks. The egos were even bigger. But regardless, super interesting time. I was there for almost 3 years. And then just around the start of the pandemic, I switched over to this private equity kind of organization called Stealth Monitoring. And what they do is provide basically camera monitoring services for two streams of business, kind of mobile monitoring for construction sites, which are constantly changing, and then your fixed kind of monitoring, which is say a strip mall or a residential building. Nothing's changing. You're monitoring it. You're providing those services, and super interesting, very fast paced. They literally doubled in size during the time that I was there. But I think again, the same themes apply. It was very much focused, private equity funded, and so hyper focus on the bottom line. And every single decision is going through this lens of the return on invested capital, everything from, moving your office building to moving where our monitoring center is on the other side of the world to switching out equipment that's at certain sites to refurbish them and reuse them. Everything is through that lens, which is a very much a focusing factor, and very interesting to think about because you really kind of get into the heads of the folks who are funding these types of organizations. And again, a lot of learning there. And from there, I think kind of got tired of forgetting what my family looked like because it was it's hard to downplay the amount of work that goes into it, but it's again super interesting, super rewarding. And then from there, what I came across was this role at Metrolinx, which I saw and felt was pretty unique in performance management. And where I sit now is kind of bringing it all together, which is there's all these teams, and I think in finance there's so many different types of minds, skill sets, types of work. It's tough because it's like saying, you work in medicine and it's not very specific, right? So there's so many kinds of medical professionals. I think feel like a lot of people, I'm sure everybody on this call has experienced this when somebody thinks you just do taxes if you're in accounting, right? And so this role really brings all the different kinds of minds together, and I'm kind of helping be the nexus of all that. And so it's been kind of a culmination indirectly of that, while feeling like I'm contributing to, like a public sector type scenario where actually adding social good. So yeah, that's kind of a lengthy overview.